On its original release in 1955, the killing was actually called Clean Break. After it was optioned for a movie and the producers decided to call their film something different, the book was reissued to tie in with that. The author, Lionel White, was formerly a crime journalist and wrote a string of novels between 1952 and 1978. It says in my issues about the author section that White wrote about planning and executing the big caper. Now that seems a little inaccurate here. Johnny Clay, fresh out of a spell in prison, sets out to rob a racetrack. He does little actual planning in the book, and the story is much more about how he recruits his team and the personalities that make it up. I use the word personalities rather than characters because, with the possible exception of Shirley, there isn't anyone particular who has any kind of character arc. Nevertheless, the people that are involved represent the cliches of modern gangster films. To give White due credit, he did help create those cliches. There's Johnny, of course, the tough, no-nonsense ringleader, doing it all for a new life with his girl. Randy, the crooked cop with a debt to the mob. There's Big Mike, the Irish bartender with a gambling problem. And there's George, who's the Weasley inside man with a femme fatale wife who turns out to be the spanner in the works. George's wife Sherry is having an affair with Val Cannon, a local thug with a great name. When she learns of George's involvement in a robbery, Sherry plots with Val to rob the robbers and run off together. Well, that's her plan. Val shares half of it at most. So if the novel is light on the planning, it's light on the execution too. It's a simple plan in a simple novel. 50s capers apparently favoured going in with a Tommy gun to cracking Mission Impossible style Uber security. The robbery itself takes place on pages 139 through 141 of my volume, which weighs in at barely 155 in total. Despite its brevity, White does a pretty good job setting the scene, no doubt helped in part by just how many other works borrow from the same source book. You can almost hear his narrator in his movie tone voice.
At exactly 3:45 on that Saturday afternoon in the last week of September,
White did half of screenwriters Kubrick and Thompson's work for them. You can almost visualize the men strutting around in suits and hats, calling all the women broads and dames. There are only two female characters that have any sort of meaningful involvement. There's Sherry, the conniving know-it-all, who stays just close enough to the believable line that she just about manages to not scupper the whole novel. And there's Faye, Johnny's girlfriend, who's there purely to dangle the happily ever after carrot in front of the audience. The shortness of the novel doesn't really prevent White from giving all of the gang their own flavour, and bar Sherry, they are convincing enough. The novel has a good pace, again its lack of length also meaning a lack of wastage or filler. Indeed, White's real skill is in giving just enough to a reader and letting them fill in the rest for themselves. The finale isn't perhaps as explosive or satisfying as more modern audiences might expect, but White doesn't leave many loose ends, and that's true of the novel as a whole. It's a strong but short novella, dated but nonetheless enjoyable for it. So how does it differ from the film? Well, Kubrick is for the most part very faithful to his source material. In fact, some of it, especially early on, is almost word for word.
he was totally disinterested in horse racing and held a lifelong contempt for gambling.
However, the movie is rather hamstrung by a dreadful cast. Nobody has to deal with bad actors in a book after all. Certain characters are different in the novel. Unger and Clay antagonize each other in the book, but in the film they have a father-son type relationship. Some of the story is streamlined, leaving certain characters with less to do. Notably, and sadly, Nicky and Maurice are both given more prominent roles and some scenery to chew. The bar brawl Johnny stages to mask his escape is in the film version choreographed to achieve some comedic effect. Likewise, Johnny's scene at the airport and the fairly humorous intervention of the lady and her dog is an addition for the film, which ends on a lighter note in general. Kubrick tries to at least inject some humour into White's story, and the novel is quite dark in comparison. Overall, both the novel and the film are neither particularly good or particularly bad, but if I have to choose between one, I'd side with the book. White was a fairly accomplished writer when he wrote Clean Break in 1955, but Kubrick was just starting out. If you enjoyed this video, I will be putting up another one about Paths of Glory fairly soon. When that's available, there will be a link in the description. In the meantime, why not check out some of the other videos on my channel.